Please report.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give the court in this matter to be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
Yes.
Go ahead and state your name. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
It's Officer Nathan Bowler, and it's B-O-W-L-E-R.
Where do you work?
I'm employed as a patrolman with the Lowell Police Department.
How long have you been a patrolman?
Approximately 8 years.
Officer Bowler, drawing your attention to January 27th, 2010 at approximately 3 a.m. Were you working at that time?
Yes.
And what shift were you working on that day?
I was working what we refer to as between 1, which is 1 in the morning, to 9 in the morning.
And at approximately 3 a.m., what, if anything, did you do at that time?
I received a call advising me to respond to 99 West 6th Street within the city of Lowell.
To respond to where else?
99 West 6th Street, Your Honor, in the city of Lowell for a domestic in progress.
What was the information that you were given from that dispatch?
Objection to that, Chair.
Overruled.
I recall specifically that it was for a domestic in progress, which obviously would be an assault between two related parties. I don't recall other information provided to me.
After you received that information, what, if anything, did you do at that time?
I responded to 99 West 6th Street with 2 other units and responded to apartment number 3.
And what, if anything, did you find when you responded to apartment 3?
I was met at the door by several persons that I recognized to be residents of the building from past incidents, but not of apartment 3. Those residents were standing in the doorway of apartment 3, which was ajar. They let me into the apartment. As they did so, they advised me that the resident had been struck by her boyfriend.
After you obtained that information, what, if anything, did you do?
I entered the living room of the apartment, immediately noted a female well known to this officer due to a number of prior domestic-related incidents that I responded to. As,
what, if anything, could you observe about at that time?
I was sitting in a kitchen chair facing this officer. She was bleeding from the mouth profusely. She was holding her neck. She was sobbing uncontrollably and her body was shaking.
At that time, did you speak with Ms.
Yes.
And what did she tell you?
She advised me that she had got into an altercation with her boyfriend, who was also well known to me from prior incidents that I knew to be William Cruwys. She named her boyfriend by name, stated that he had punched her in the face repeatedly, split her lip in doing so, that he had kicked her while wearing shoes, and that he had choked her, strangled her, pushing her backwards over a couch, eventually bringing her to the floor, continued to strangle her. Doing so, pushed her against the floor, causing her not to be able to draw breath in.
At that time, from what you could tell, was William Cruwys in that apartment?
No. As well as the 2 neighbors advised me that he had fled out the back door. There were 2 doors, obviously, to the apartment.
Did Ms. tell you anything else at that time?
She stated that as Mr. Cruwys was strangling her on the floor, he was advising her that he was going to kill her. She believed at that time that he had the ability, and obviously the stated intent to do so. She began to feel like she was going to black out, that is to say lose consciousness. Knowing that her neighbors were downstairs and upstairs and to the side of her, she began to pound on the floor with her foot in an effort to get someone to come to the apartment. At that time she believed she lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, she realized Mr. Cruwys was fleeing out the rear apartment door into a rear common hallway, and that the residents of the apartment underneath her were banging on her apartment door, shouting.
After you obtained that information from Ms. what, if anything, did you do next?
By this time, Trinity EMS was on scene. They assumed medical care of Ms. At which time I responded to the rear common hallway of the apartment building. I had knowledge from past incidents, specifically a week prior to this incident, where Mr. Cruwys had engaged in civil behavior, and he had fled into the rear common hallway and hid in the common basement area. I responded to that area. It wasn't in the basement area. I responded up to the second floor of the residence, the multiple unit dwelling, and located the gentleman that I well knew to be Mr. Cruwys standing in the hallway.
What floor is apartment 3 on that building?
Apartment 3 is on what would be the first floor, although it's not a true ground floor. It's more like a split level, multiple unit dwelling. The apartment in question, apartment 3, would be on the first floor. Mr. Cruwys is located on the second floor.
Do you see Mr. William Cruwys in court this afternoon?
Yes.
Could you identify him using an article of clothing and indicating where he is in the courtroom?
He's sitting to the right, defense counsel, wearing a white shirt.
Your Honor, may the record reflect identification of the defendant, William Cruwys.
Any objection, Mr. Ahern? Mr. Ahern? Any objection to the identification?
I have none, Judge.
Record may so reflect.
When you encountered the defendant, what was he wearing?
He had no shirt on, he had pants, and red combat boots.
What happened when you first encountered the defendant in that stairwell?
I recognized him on seeing him, advised him to turn around, place his hands behind his back in an effort to immobilize him, specifically handcuff him.
Did he comply with that order?
No.
What did he do?
When I issued that command, he was facing me with his hands in view. Subsequent to issuing the command, Mr. Cruwys turned away from me into the corner created by 2 walls of the common hallway, brought his hands into that corner, thus bringing his entire front body into that corner.
At that time, were you the only officer in that stairwell?
Yes.
And after Mr. Cruwys turned away from you, what happened at that point?
At that time, I attempted to execute several contract controls, wherein I took control of his right wrist, attempted to apply handcuffs to it. At that time, Mr. Cruwys wrenched his hand out of my grasp, turned his entire body away from me, and tried to flee down the stairs.
And what, if anything, did you do at that time after he did that?
At that time, I pursued him several steps. Once again, was able to reacquire his right wrist. He attempted to turn away from me again, pull that wrist out of my grasp again. In doing so, he placed his left hand against my chest and pushed backwards in an effort to pull his wrist out of my grasp.
At that time, were you the only officer around Mr. Cruwys?
Yes.
And after he pushed you with his left arm, what happened at that point?
At that time, I issued a 1-second burst of Department Chief OC spray to his face. We intended bringing him under control, stopping the assault on myself, and affecting handcuffing techniques.
What was the effect of that OC spray on Mr. Cruwys?
I had the desired effect. I gained conclusive control of Mr. Cruwys and was eventually able to handcuff him.
At that time, were you able to observe Mr. Cruwys' body?
Yes.
From what you could see, were there any injuries on Mr. Cruwys at that time?
From the moment I first saw him in the stairway, subsequent to the struggle, there was no injury that I noted.
After you gained control of Mr. Cruwys, what did you do at that time?
That time, excuse me, as a result of Mr. Cruwys' attempted flight, we were now outside of the door, the rear door that he originally fled out of. That door was open, and at that time, several other officers, namely Officer Kertel and Officer McCabe, assumed control of Mr. Cruwys, the arrestee, at which time I was able to speak with that great lady.
Where was Ms. when you spoke to her that second time?
Still sitting in that same chair, still being tended to by EMS. By this time, they were attempting to apply C-spine and place her on her back.
Did you notice, or strike that, did you make any other observations of Ms. at that time?
Yes.
What were those observations?
To do so, excuse me. I made several observations of her and her apartment. Initially, I observed her and attempted to speak with her again. I observed, once again, that she was still bleeding profusely from the mouth area. I was able to view what I immediately recognized to be strangulation marks, that is to say ligature, which is redness and bruising around her neck, consistent with being strangled. I also observed small dotting within the eyes, including broken blood vessels, referred to as petechia. Also, also consistent with having been strangled.
Did Ms. say anything at that point?
Only to elaborate the story that she originally told me. That is to say, I confirmed all the details with her.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes. Show Mr. Ahern whatever you
I
can.
did, yes. Officer Bowler, I'm showing you a photograph. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
Yes, this is Mrs.
Is that Liz?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of what looks like around the time of your dealings with her last week?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to admit this as Commonwealth Exhibit 1.
Any
No
objection?
objection.
Have you marked this Exhibit 1?
Officer Bowler, at any time did you speak with Ms. Neighbor?
Yes.
When was that during your dealings that early morning, approximately?
As Mrs. was being transported by Trinity EMS to Saints Memorial, the arrestee, Mr. Cruwys, was moved to the transport wagon. At that time, while staying outside, I was approached by a gentleman that I knew to be a resident of Apartment 1. Also, one of the gentlemen who first let me into the apartment and met me at this door. And that gentleman, Mr. Melendez, stated that Mr. Cruwys had taken...
So the hearsay nature of...
Mr. Melendez,
Excuse me?
this is just a hearsay from statement from Mr. Melendez.
Yes. Objections overruled.
That gentleman, who I knew to be Mr. Melendez, stated that Mr. Cruwys had taken his boots from the upstairs, the second floor of the common hallway.
Did Mr. Melendez describe those boots?
He did. He described them as large red work-type boots, Timberland boots. He described them as, and he brought my attention to the boots that Mr. Cruwys was wearing. Stated that those boots were his.
I just have a moment, Your Honor.
Sure.
Officer Bowler, you mentioned earlier that you knew about an incident between Mr. Cruwys and Ms. a week prior. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you respond on that date?
Yes.
Objection, Judge. It's not relevant to this incident.
Yeah, if I may
Yes.
respond.
Yes.
The issue here is dangerousness. It does not just have to do with this one specific incident. It has to do with Mr. Cruwys' dangerousness, and the Commonwealth feels that it will show that by clear and convincing evidence that Mr. Cruwys is a danger, and that there are no conditions of release that can secure as well as the community's safety. There are a number of incidents between and Mr. Cruwys. I think that the officer should be able to testify to his knowledge of prior incidents between the two of them.
I'm going to do... You wish to be heard again?
Well, Judge, there are likewise probably more incidents where this is arrested for assaultive behavior against Mr. Cruwys. If we're going to get into this incident or any other incident, I would suggest that I should be entitled to explore the other incidents with Mr.
I make each evidentiary ruling. Do they go along?
Your Honor, can I say something?
Why don't you speak to Mr. Ahern, sir?
Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing.
Sir, why don't you speak to Mr. Ahern? He's your lawyer who's speaking for you.
Can I have one moment, Your Honor?
Certainly, you may.
Officer Bowler, you first met Mr. Cruwys on this evening, I'm talking on the evening of the 27th, when he's in the back hallway.
That's correct.
And when you meet him, you go to grab his wrist. Is that fair to say?
Initially, I attempted to place him in custody without contacting
Can you
him.
speak up a little bit so I can hear you?
Initially, I attempted to place him in custody without contacting him in any way. Eventually, I was forced to contact him due to his inability to follow directions.
And you say his right wrist?
That's correct.
And when you grab his right wrist, do you just hang on to the wrist or you grab the rest of the arm?
At that time, I was only able to contact the wrist.
Well, how, you're saying that there was a struggle with Mr. Cruwys out in this hallway. How violent was the struggle?
I don't know how to quantify violence.
Okay, you don't have to quantify it for me. When you're out there and you grab his wrist, is that what you do?
Yes.
If you grab his wrist with one or two hands?
I grabbed it with one hand.
One hand. Where's your other hand?
Attempting to access my handcuffs.
And in your other hand, what's in the other hand?
Mr. Cruwys' right wrist.
Hmm?
Mr. Cruwys' right wrist.
You grab Mr. Cruwys' right wrist. And which hand do you grab that with?
My left hand.
Your left hand. And what's in your other hand when you grab that?
It's attempting to access my handcuffs.
And when you go to spin, you try and spin him around to cuff him from the back?
I didn't attempt to spin his body. Would have been counterproductive. I just attempted to bring the wrist towards me to place a handcuff on it.
Well, you would have been asked before whether Mr. Cruwys had any injuries that you saw. And what was your answer to that?
I said I didn't see any injuries.
Okay. Well, when you struggled with him, is it fair to say that you would have caused injury to him at that time?
I testified previously under direct examination that subsequent to the struggle, there was no injury visible on the body.
Well, if Mr. Cruwys had bad bruising in his upper arm and shoulder, would that have been from you or from someone else?
Objection.
I'll sustain the objection to the nature of that, to the wording of that question.
If Mr. Cruwys, well, let me ask you this. In the struggle with him, did you bite Mr. Cruwys at all?
No, I did not.
And so if Mr. Cruwys had a bite mark on his left shoulder, that would not have been from you then.
I can only testify that I did not bite him.
Did you? Mr. Cruwys didn't have a shirt on.
That's correct.
And you didn't notice a bite mark on his left shoulder?
I testified twice now that I did not note any visible injury.
Now, you got to the apartment and you took a statement from...
Insofar as that I spoke with her and she advised me what had happened.
I'm not saying a written statement. You asked us a number of questions, didn't you?
I asked her what happened.
You asked her what happened. And one of the things that she told you was that he had kicked her with steel-toed boots?
No.
What?
No.
No. Did you have an opportunity to, before you took the stand today, when you were here on last Friday, to read the statement that she gave at the police station, a written statement?
I did read it once, yes.
And there's something different, very different about that statement, isn't there? About what was on his feet.
As far as what's in the statement and in my police report?
Yeah, in your police report you said he kicked her with sneakers, that's what she told you.
Yes.
And then when she makes a statement at the police station, it's steel-toed boots?
Apparently I didn't take the statement.
You did say that you had an opportunity to read her written statement from the police station?
Yes.
Officer Bowler, if you just look at that, you see something that's underlined there?
Objection. Your Honor, the detective who took this statement is here, as well as Mr. I would object to Mr. Officer Bowler being the one that is questioned. He has testified to what is in his police report with respect to what Mr. said. I don't understand why asking this officer about a statement that he didn't take is necessary.
Who took this statement?
She is the next witness.
Apparently there's another witness here who actually took this statement, Mr. Hart.
Yes, but I think Officer Bowler has read this report, has he not?
So I want to sustain the objection.
Now, Officer Bowler, you arrest Mr. Cruwys out in the back hall, correct?
That's correct.
And when you arrest Mr. Cruwys, he's wearing red boots,
That's correct.
red Timberland boots.
The owner of the boots identified them as Timberland. I wouldn't know what Timberland if I saw it.
And Miss Cruwys has told you previously that he kicked her with, and it was wearing sneakers?
I'm sorry, Miss.
Miss-
That's what she told me initially in the department.
Did it seem strange to you that Mr. Cruwys, like, took off his sneakers and ran out the back door?
Objection.
Sustain.
And you later determined from Mr. Melendez that the red boots that are on Mr. Cruwys' feet when he's getting into the wagon were in the hallway, weren't they?
Yes.
So would you draw an inference from that when Mr. Cruwys came out of the apartment, he had no shoes on his feet?
Objection.
Sustain.
Did Miss tell you that he had no shoes on when he left the apartment?
I don't recall if I asked that question or if she answered it.
Well, let me ask you something. When you were out in the back hall, did you find any sneakers there?
I didn't have the opportunity to look at the sneakers.
Did you find any steel-toe shoes?
I didn't have the opportunity to look at any footwear that was in the hall.
Well, the question is whether you had an opportunity or not. Did you find any?
Apparently not. I didn't have the opportunity to do so.
And you didn't find any steel-toes or sneakers, did you?
I wasn't looking for shoes, so no.
Well, when you took the red boots off Mr. Cruwys before you put him into the wagon, correct?
That's correct.
And did you go back in to find his shoes, what he was wearing?
No.
Now, when he is outside, well, first of all, when he's in the hallway, he has no shirt on. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
And when you bring him outside and put him into the wagon, what is he wearing?
Wearing pants and red, apparently Timberland boots.
And a what?
Boots.
No shirt.
That's correct.
And this was on January the 27th?
That's correct.
Did you happen to ask Mr. Cruwys where his shirt was?
No.
You were in the apartment. Did you see Mr. Cruwys' shirt?
There was clothing in the bedroom. I didn't look to see if it was Mr. Cruwys or Mr. Stevens.
Now, when you spoke with Mr. Did you notice anything about sobriety?
I didn't notice. That is to say, was it my opinion that she was intoxicated?
What was your opinion?
I'm not sure how to answer your question. Wherein I don't have an opinion either way, so I didn't notice anything specific about her sobriety that was notable.
So you didn't see anything abnormal about her level of sobriety or intoxication, either way?
The only abnormalities that I noted were apparently due to an extreme assault she had suffered. I didn't notice anything consistent with non-sobriety.
When you were in there, did you have any conversation with about anything that she had to drink that night?
No.
Did you have any conversation with Ms. about any medication she was on?
No.
Were you there when the EMTs arrived?
Yes.
And did you overhear the conversation with the EMTs asking her about any medication she took?
No.
I have nothing more, Judge.
Anything further from this witness?
Very briefly, Officer Buller was transported to the hospital.
Yes.
Do you know what hospital she was transported to?
Saints Medical Center.
I have no further questions.
Anything on that issue, Mr. Ahern?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Could you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Detective Cheryl Mercier, M-E-R-C-I-E-R,
And where do you work?
Lowell Police Department.
What job title do you have at the Lowell Police Department?
I'm a detective in the Family Service Unit.
What does that mean to be a detective in the Family Service Unit?
Basically, I handle sexual assaults, anything to do with family, domestic violence.
Are you currently involved in a case involving William Cruwys?
Yes,
Do you see William Cruwys in court this afternoon?
yes.
Could you identify him using an article of clothing and indicating where he is in the courtroom?
He has a white T-shirt with red lettering on it, red numbers.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the identification of the defendant, William Cruwys?
Any objection, Mr. Ahern?
I have none, Judge.
Record may so reflect.
When did you become involved in the most recent investigation against Mr. Cruwys?
On, I think it was Wednesday the 27th, my boss had asked me to follow up on a attempted murder he was involved with.
And who is the alleged victim in that case?
The victim is
On January 27th, 2010, did you meet with Ms.
yes, here at the courthouse.
And did you and another detective take photographs of?
First I took photographs here, and then we went to her house and took more photographs.
And who was involved in the taking of those photographs from the Lowell Police Department?
Myself and Detective McConnell.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Detective Mercier, I'm going to show you a series of photographs. Do you recognize that first photograph?
This is a picture of the inside upper lip of...
And when was that photograph taken?
That was taken on Wednesday the 27th, I believe.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of his lip at that time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to introduce this as the next number exhibit, which is number 2.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
May be marked as Exhibit 2.
I'm going to show you another photograph. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
This is bruising on the inside bottom lip of
And again, when was that photograph taken?
27th.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of the bottom lip of Miss at that time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to introduce this as the next numbered exhibit.
Any objection, Mr. Ahern?
I have no objection.
May be marked as Exhibit 3.
I'm showing you another photograph. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is a full facial picture.
And is her neck included in that photograph as well?
Yes.
And when was that photograph taken?
The 27th.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of that time?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to introduce this as the next numbered exhibit.
No objection?
No objection.
May be marked as Exhibit 4.
And one final photograph. Do you recognize that?
This is a picture of neck.
And when was that photograph taken?
27th.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of Miss neck at that time?
Yes.
I move to introduce this as the next numbered exhibit.
No objection.
objection.
May be marked as Exhibit 5.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Again, Detective Mercier, I'm showing you a photograph. You recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes.
What is depicted in that photograph?
It's a picture from the shoulders up, showing bruising on her face, her lip, her neck, eyes.
When was that photograph taken?
27th.
Is that a fair and accurate representation of Miss?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to introduce this as the next numbered exhibit.
No objection?
No objection, Judge.
May be marked as Exhibit 6.
Detective Mercier, I'm showing you another photograph. Do you recognize what's in that photograph?
Another headshot of with her eyes closed, showing bruising on the top of her eyelids.
When was that photograph
Judge,
taken?
thanks. Excuse me.
Yes.
there's no reason for the officer to describe what's in the photograph. The picture speaks for itself.
The picture does speak for
I mean,
itself.
she identifies a face shot.
Is there any objection to the series of photographs?
Anyone?
I can see there's a series of photographs
There.
in this testimony's hands. Is there any objection to any of those photographs?
Your Honor, it's my understanding that Attorney Ahern has no objection to the rest of all these photographs coming in,
We'll mark these as Exhibit 6. Do you know how many there are in total?
in addition to the ones that are one.
We'll start with Exhibit 6 will be 6A, and then we'll just mark these in order. So 6A, 6B, until the end. There's no objection to any of them, Mr. Ahern? Mr. Ahern, no objection to any of them?
I don't have an objection.
All right. These are all taken, Mr. David?
Yes, Your Honor.
There are 17 additional. Here. Detective Mercier, on Wednesday, January 28th, did you take a statement from Ms.
Yes.
And did you type up that statement?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Detective Mercier, I'm showing you a document. Do you recognize that?
It's a type statement I took from...
Is that the statement you took on January 28th, 2010?
Yes.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of that typed witness statement?
Yes.
Your Honor, I move to introduce this as, I believe, Exhibit 7.
Any objection, Mr. Ahern?
Judge, I would have my only for identification at this time. This is an unsigned statement.
It's the witness has identified it as the statement that you took from this. Again, it's a 58A with very lax evidentiary rules. I would ask that it be introduced as an exhibit at this time.
Do we have the signed statement?
You have-
Yes, I do.
When was that signed?
Right after we printed it out. She signed it, read it, and signed it.
And you only have one copy of that signed statement?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would just ask that this be introduced. The attorney heard the questionnaire about any signatures about the statement, but she has identified this document as Ms. Hewitt's statement.
Do you want to look at the signed one to see if there's any differences between this and that one, Mr. Ahern?
Well, Judge, I would object. I think a statement or type statement is no different from a police report. As putting it into evidence?
At a 58A here. All right, maybe marked as Exhibit 7.
Detective Mercier, on January 28, 2010, did you go to 99 West 6th Street, Apartment 3?
Yes.
Were you accompanied by Ms. at that time?
We met her there.
And what, if any, observations did you make of the apartment at that time?
There was blood on the floor. She was in there with her friend starting to clean up. There was blood on the floor, blood in the bedroom. It was kind of a little bit in a disarray. She just had already been started cleaning it.
When you say there was blood on the floor, could you be more specific about where in the apartment there was blood on the floor?
As soon as you walked in to the left of the door on the floor, there was drops of blood.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Your Honor, if we could just have a moment. I would like to use a photograph that the clerk is just marking as an
All
exhibit.
right. There are a number of them, so
Thank
it'll take
you.
a little while to put them on.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes.
Detective Mercier, I'm showing you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 6I. Do Do you recognize what's in that photograph?
It's blood on the floor and apartment.
And is that the blood that you referenced you just saw on January 28th, 2010?
Yes.
Detective Mercier, while you were in 99 West 6th Street on apartment 3 on January 28th, did you look at any clothing?
Yes. Ed showed us the yellow bathrobe and the tie that he had used to wrap around her neck, along with a pair of gray sweatpants that were ripped and bloodstained, and a sweatshirt that matched the sweatpants.
And did Ms. indicate that those were the clothes that she was wearing on January 27th?
Yes.
Can I may I approach?
Yes.
Detective Mercier, I'm showing you first what's been previously marked as Exhibit 6N. And do you recognize what's in that photograph?
These were the sweatpants that she was wearing the night she was attacked.
And I'm now going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit 6O. Do you recognize what's depicted in that photograph?
The yellow bathrobe tie, part of the sweatpants, and the sweatshirt.
Thank you. I just have a moment, Your Honor.
Yes.
Detective Mercier, are you also involved in another investigation and pending criminal case against Mr. William Cruwys?
Yes.
You asked her a number of preliminary questions, did you not?
Basically, I just told her to tell me what happened that night. I don't tell them what to say. They're just kind of telling me their story, and I'm
I'm
taking
not
it along.
asking about that. I mean, you ask her about, has she been drinking, fair to say?
I didn't ask her. No, she tells me this in her story. I don't really ask too many questions.
Well, you have it on your thing. Have you recently used any form of controlled substance?
In the beginning, yes, I do. I'm
And the
sorry.
answer to
yes.
that was no.
I'm going to look at my report. Have you been drinking alcoholic beverages, meaning that day, today, the day I'm taking the
You're
statement?
right, and the answer is no.
Right.
And above that is, are you taking any medications?
Yes.
And what medications did she list?
Seroquel, methadone, and Rimanon?
No.
And did you ask her what effect those medicines have on her?
Objection.
Oral.
You may.
I might have asked her like what they were for.
And did you make any notes contemporaneous with writing this report as to what her answer would have been?
What the medications are for?
Yes.
I think if you go down my report a little, I talk about she had a broken neck at one time, and that's what some of these medications are for.
Well, Seroquel, isn't that a antipsychotic medication?
Objection.
If she knows.
Overruled, if you know it.
I don't know.
And do you know what Remeron is for?
I'm not sure. I think she said some of those were for her neck.
But you didn't check out what they were for?
No.
Now, when you took the statement from her, the statement is taken at 12:50, like 10 minutes of 1 in the afternoon.
Right.
And when you take the statement, what time did she arrive at the station?
I picked her up. I spent the whole day with Linda that day, from 11 o'clock until about 3:30, 4 p.m.
And during that time period, you take the statement?
Yes.
Now, prior to taking the statement, did you read Officer Bowler's report?
The day prior, probably the day, the Officer Bowler's report was not in front of me.
Was not in front of you?
No, I read it the day prior.
Well, what was your basis of knowledge when you took the statement? What had you
Okay.
reviewed prior to taking the
I had
statement?
reviewed Officer Bowler's report the day he wrote it.
Okay. So prior to taking the statement, you had read Officer Bowler's report.
On the 27th. I wrote my report on the 28th.
Well, you take the statement on the 28th.
Right.
So it's really like almost a day and a half before you take the statement?
Yes.
And there were some differences between what you told Officer Bowler and what you put in the statement to you, wasn't there?
Yes. Yes.
And did you make a listing of what those differences were?
Nope. I don't compare what Officer Bowler wrote and what I didn't compare them.
I believe in her statement she says that she was with Mr. Cruwys for approximately 4 hours before the police came.
Yes.
And during that time period, they both drinking?
It says he consumes 14 beers and she has 2 coffee brandies.
During the 4-hour period.
Right.
Now, and that's what her statement was. You gave her the statement and she signed it, did she not?
Yes.
And
She
did you ever
read
read
and
it?
signed
Did you ever read it before she signed it?
Yes.
And these are all her words.
Yes.
But she didn't type this, did she?
No, I'm typing, she's telling me a story.
Okay, you stop as she's giving the story and talk to her during the interim?
We do stop a little bit because I'm a very slow typer.
You stop for what?
A little bit because I'm a very slow typer. So she talks faster than I can type it. So I slow her down.
And what does she tell you about what he has on his feet when he leaves the apartment?
I'm not sure if she told me. I have to go through this a little bit. I don't think she tells me what he has on his feet in her statement.
Do you have an additional question, Mr. Ahern?
She doesn't tell you what he has on his feet?
No. She doesn't tell me what he's wearing when he exits the apartment.
But when he's inside the apartment, she tells you the effect that he kicks her?
Yes.
And he's wearing steel-toed boots?
Yes.
Officer Bowler's report before that, and she told Officer Bowler he was wearing sneakers, was he not?
I would have to look at Officer Bowler's report. Yes, in Officer Bowler's report, it does say he's wearing sneakers.
And you knew that, from Officer Bowler's report, that he was wearing a neighbor's boots, red boots, that he had found in the hallway.
Do you know what paragraph that says it in?
If you go to the second page of Officer Bowler's report, the seventh line up begins, Mr. Melinda stated that prior to the incident. Do you see that?
No, I'm sorry. No. Second paragraph on the second page?
On the second, there's only, it's actually marked as page 3. It's the second page of this type report.
I only have 2 pages here. And you're saying it's on page 2?
Can I approach on it?
You certainly can.
We don't have the page.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it says, right, the boots had been in the rear of the hallway. Outside his car. Does he say they were his?
Is there a question
Right,
pending,
then-
Mr. Ahern?
Well, if you read on, you,
That's his, okay. Mr. Melendez does say the red boots are his.
and that they were in the hallway,
Yep.
not inside the apartment.
Nope.
I have no more questions, Judge.
Anything further?
Nothing further.
You may step down.